to see you. And instead, a lot of gay guys, younger gay guys, it seems, well, it doesn't seem, I know this for a fact, a lot of twinks or whatever, specifically, they use their sexuality as a currency, which is fine, because if you have it, use it. If you got it, flaunt it. There's nothing wrong with that. I have no problem with that at all. But what I'm saying is, if that's all you have, and you're only cultivating that side of yourself and not cultivating the things that matter most about being a human being, which are your brain, your personality, if you're kind, if you're compassionate, if you're a good human being. I mean, if you have something of importance to give back to the world, a talent or whatever, those are the things that are important. And so if you have a good core and a good sense of self, as I feel that I did when I was younger, I never was one to flaunt my sexuality. I've always been very sexual, but I've never been overtly sexual. You know what I mean? So like in the bedroom, I'm extremely sexual and extremely uninhibited sexually, whatever. But when it comes to being out in public or whatever, in the streets, it's like in the streets and the sheets, it's like a choir boy in the streets and a whore in the sheets, or slut in the sheets, or whatever that saying is. So that's me. And so for me, I just don't find it to be, and the reason I'm like that is, one, I'm just generally modest individual about my body. I'm not someone who likes to just share it with everybody in the world. I share it with people that I'm close to, like my husband or whatever, and people when I was dating and stuff, whatever. But I don't just, I would never do Playboy or Playgirl or whatever it is, or pose nude or whatever, even if I had the perfect body to do that anymore. I would never do those things. It was never me. I'm not an exhibitionist, I guess is what I'm saying, because I've never valued people's appearance so much more than other parts of the personality. Yes, I love beauty just like anybody else does, and I think it's a great thing. But as they say, beauty fades. So if you are, cashing in on that kind of currency your entire youth, and you're not really cultivating the other sides of yourself, your brain, your intellect, etc., your heart, which I think is the most important personally, then you're in for a really rough ride as you age. You're going to be in for something really, really tough as you get older, and you're not going to notice it or know it or realize it until you're older and things start to change in your body, because they inevitably do. Even if you have plastic surgery, these things, it doesn't matter. Even if you stay really fit and in shape, you will never look the same or as good as you did, and generally, as you did when you were 20 years old or 25 years old or whatever age you think you look the best at. Because as you get older, it's going to change, whether you want it to or not. And there's, of course, like I said, things you can do, plastic surgery, whatever. But these are all things that are just on the external. And so if you're focused on those things as you age, you're really, You're really bankrupt emotionally. You're really bankrupt in any other kind of currency that you can have in the world. And that's the way I look at it. There's sexual currency or beauty or physical currency, whatever you're going to call it. And then there's intellectual currency. Then there's the heart, the currency of the heart and love and empathy and those things. And so, I don't know, maybe other people are different, but I've always seen throughout my life that people who are vapid, vacuous people who don't really focus on the things that matter ultimately in life. They may matter when you're young, and it may be important when you're young, but and for suit you for those things. But as you age, those things no longer really are as important. And it's hard to remember that when you're young, or to know that even. But I'm telling you, someone who's older than some of my listeners who are in their 20s or whatever, it is true. So please focus on what is important about yourself and what really matters, and love yourself for things that are not so superficial, because love yourself for things that will always stay the same, and not for things that are going to abruptly wake you up one day and say, fuck, I'm old. Looking in the mirror and say, fuck, I'm old. And look at these wrinkles on my face, or this sagging ass, or whatever it is, or these sagging balls. And do you know, guys, as you get older, your balls begin to sag. Not the balls necessarily, but the part behind them, It's real tight when you're young, and it gets lower and lower and lower. And so, not all guys, the bigger the balls, the more they sag. So if you have big balls, you're probably in for it. But if you have tighter balls, then there probably won't be as much of a problem. That's just what I've read about. Anyway, so that's what I wanted to talk about that today. Also, I wanted to talk about Madonna. Madonna was caught texting in a Broadway play yesterday, and she was texting through the entire second act of the play. And, that is so fucking rude. And, of course, her phone's on, it's lit up, and she's, I don't know, even if the sound was on or whatever, it was like tap, 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 tap. Sometimes when you text, it taps that tap sound. And so I don't know what the actual, sound was or whatever, or what the actual repercussions of her doing it were to other people around her. But it was obviously, like when I'm in a theater or a movie theater or anything, and someone has their phone out in this pit of darkness, all of a sudden it's blinding you. If it's right in front of you or beside you, it's hard to, it's distracting. And it's hard to focus or stay into the immersed in the play or the movie or whatever it is you're watching. And so I'm really disappointed in her for being this way. And so she asked apparently to go, or wanted to go backstage to see the main character, the main actor, after the show, and he refused to see her because he knew she'd been texting the entire time through the second act. This is not the first time, though, that this happened to Madonna. Madonna actually, here in Texas, when she went to the, I think it was called the Austin Roadhouse or something. I can't remember what it's called. It's a theater in Austin, Texas, where they have a lot of movie premieres or whatever, independent movie premieres, and a lot of actors and actresses and famous people go there every year. Anyway, she was kicked out of that for the same reason, and it banned from the theater, as a matter of fact. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you think she just thinks she's better than everybody else and she can do whatever she wants because she's Madonna? Bitch, I'm Madonna, Or do you think she just is oblivious? I mean, if she doesn't enjoy the play or the movie or whatever she's watching, then leave. Don't start texting in the middle of it. So I'm really disappointed in her. I thought she had more class than that, but apparently she doesn't. Anti-gay proponents are coming out with all these reasons that they have for, gay marriage not being legal or whatever. And the reasons that they have are so completely fucking ridiculous because, as you know, we've been having this fight for, I don't know how long we've been having this fight about gay marriage equality in the United States, obviously. But it's been, of course, incredibly frustrating for people like myself and my husband who want to have equality and be able to get married in our own state, or not to be able to get married here, but to be able to have our marriage that we've already had in a state that recognizes it recognized. And some of the reasons they have are gays and lesbians shouldn't be allowed to marry the person they love because most Americans are in favor of that, and also most Americans aren't. In addition, marriage equality is bad for kids, according to a study, had nothing to do with marriage. Also, religion, tradition, and straight people don't actually want to be married. So if gay people can marry, then straight people will lose interest in each other. So these are some of the most ridiculous arguments presented to the U.S. Supreme Court, ahead of the arguments coming next week in about whether gay marriage should be allowed across the country and recognized in every state, regardless of state policy or whatever. And so, I mean, I heard last year when they were doing the same thing about DOMA, the first half of DOMA that was overturned. Before that happened, the arguments by the prosecution, the plaintiffs, which were different states, various states like Texas and so forth, who said, things as ridiculous as this. These are the things they come up with. If you have to come up with something so fucking ridiculous and so far out there to defend something, then you obviously don't have a real reason to believe what you believe. And they're just reaching at straws. And it's so ridiculous because one of the briefs says that children of lesbian, gay, bi, and transgender people do worse than their parents when their parents get married. But it's based on a study from 1995, which is 10 years before marriage equality was even legal anywhere. And another one says that gays are so politically powerful that they shouldn't be allowed to marry because, well, they never actually explain why. And so they go on and on and on about these things. They're just reaching and reaching. So I wanted you to hear this guy explain it to you. It's just 2 minutes long. Listen to what he says.
Rounded up the weirdest Supreme Court briefs that argue against allowing gays and lesbians to marry. Some are full of mistakes, others have baffling arguments, and at least one is incredibly sexist and signed by a member of Congress. For the American Foundation for Equal Rights, I'm Matt Baum, and welcome to Marriage News Watch for April 20th, 2015. Here are just some of the stupefying arguments presented to the U.S. Supreme Court ahead of oral argument next week. Gay and lesbian Americans shouldn't be allowed to marry each other because most citizens are in favor of that, and also most citizens aren't. Marriage equality is bad for kids, according to a study that had nothing to do with marriage equality. Also, religion, tradition, and straight people don't actually want to marry each other, so if gay people can marry each other, straight people will lose interest in marriage? Maybe the strangest brief came from a group called Same-Sex Attracted Men and Their Wives. These are gay guys who married straight women and who seem to think that the case will result in a, quote, mandate requiring same-sex marriage. It won't. Don't worry, nobody's going to be required to have a same-sex wedding. The brief also argues that gay people shouldn't marry each other because that implies that there's something wrong with marrying straight people. Another brief claims that the children of LGBTs do worse when their parents get married, but as proof, it cites a 1995 study which was 9 years before marriage equality was legal anywhere. Another says that gays have so much public support that they shouldn't be allowed to marry because, well, that's never really explained. And it contradicts Nam's brief that gays don't have enough public support. Then there's a brief signed by the leaders of the 2012 Republican National Convention Committee on the Platform. That's Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn, former Republican National Committee Vice Chairman James Bopp Jr., and Carolyn McLarty, chair of the RNC's Committee on Resolution and a retired veterinarian. Their argument that men are so promiscuous and women so emotional that they need to marry each other to control those impulses. They also argue that only straight couples and their children can fight tyrants and totalitarian regimes. No explanation for how that works. It also claims that the average gay relationship lasts 1.5 years. Again, this is a brief paid for and signed by Republican Party leaders and at least one member of Congress. It's probably a good thing that the arguments against marriage equality are so convoluted. It's certainly not helping the case for preserving those marriage bans. Oral argument is going to be the morning of April 28th, so keep an eye out for that. That's next Tuesday. Hopefully this is the last time that we'll have to roll our eyes at arguments like these. Subscribe here on YouTube to stay up to date on all these stories. For the American Foundation for Equal Rights, I'm Matt Baum. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.
All right, so as he said, the arguments are ridiculous, and we're used to hearing these, of course, from the right and from hearing the ridiculous arguments they have, but the fact is that, I was actually discussing this earlier today on the Off Limits Show page with some people about how ridiculous the Republicans are and the right-wing conservatives and how logic has never been their strong suit and has always been a problem for them. They will argue anything, anything they can argue against anything, but it doesn't have to make sense. As long as they win the argument, as long as somehow they win the argument, they think they do, or as long as somehow they convince the judge or whatever, or whomever it is they're trying to convince that, to come to their side of thinking or their way of thinking, they'll say and do anything to make that happen. Logic is not something that they really value. And, look at the people that they have running for office or in office on their side. People like, of course, Sarah Palin and Mark Rubio and Ted Cruz and these people who, what's his name? Bobby Jindal, whatever. These people are so completely ludicrous, and their way of thinking is moronic. And so for people to actually put any kind of stock in their way of thinking just baffles me at all. I guess it really just boils down to people's hatred towards gays so much. They hate gay people so much that they're willing to stand behind people who make absolutely no sense and are complete morons like Sarah Palin and so forth. And in order to push their own personal social agenda forward, or the religious, rather, I should say, agenda forward. And I've said before, I don't really think that if religion were out of the equation, which it should be anyhow, because why? Separation of church and state is also another problem for the right-wing conservatives, which is ironic since they say they want small government. Yeah, but anyway, they are often, heard saying things that are, in direct, contrast to a separation of church and state. They're always saying that they want, more religion in the government and so forth. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But first, Marco Rubio, senator from Florida, is Republican, said Sunday that he believes sexual orientation isn't a choice. Yeah, he says that sexual orientation is not a choice. That's good, right? That's great. He understands that sexual orientation is not a choice, which is rare to hear a Republican or a right-wing conservative say that. it's almost always, it's a choice and it's a way of life. It's a lifestyle choice or whatever, blah, blah, blah. So this was something that, you may think, wow, that's good. We've got a Republican who actually understands, because if he understands that sexual orientation is not a choice,